Hey, thank you very much. I'll give an update on the Lunar Discovery and Exploration Program, which is NASA's lunar science program for both robotic and human missions. And I will also say a few words about commercial lunar payload services this year. Go to the next chart, please. So probably the one thing to alert you all to, if you didn't watch the news in the spring, is that we did make the selection for the 3 Artemis 3 deployed instruments on the competitive A3DI call, which are listed here. And those teams are off hitting the ground running. And we have, in addition to that, we have other instruments that we're considering for Artemis 3, if bluntly, if there's enough technical capability to fly them. And these include the next generation lunar laser retroreflector, and also, I believe, the Avatar experiment that'll be discussed by Kevin Sada. You go to the next chart, please. There are a number of other lunar science solicitations coming up that I think we've briefed the community on in the past. We're going to have our next PRISM call be a standalone site agnostic instrument call, which the draft call will be out for comments imminently. We are also in the final stages of putting together the lunar terrain vehicle instrument competed call. Again, all these go out for community comments before they're posted. We're also taking all the lessons we learned from Artemis 3 deployed instruments into our next Artemis 4 deployed instrument call, which we will issue relatively soon because we would like to leave more time for instrument development between the call and its selections and the flight for Artemis 4 than we did for Artemis 3. We were somewhat constrained on Artemis 3 because of budget availability and also watching how the systems and processes matured. And then we will follow that up with a PRISM 4 suite call and then a handheld instruments call, which will likely be an RFP for Artemis 4. If you go to the next chart, please. I'll recount since 2024 was our company, our partner company's first attempts at flying to and landing on the moon. I'll start off with Astrobotic Technologies Peregrine Mission 1. They launched in January. They found out soon after launching that they had an anomaly in their propulsion system, which did not allow them to attempt to fly on the moon. They elected to fly out, based on their insertion trajectory, out to the distance of the moon from the Earth. They came back to Earth, which was just them flying their nominal trajectory out, and they elected to have the spacecraft re-enter Earth for disposal, which made sure that the spacecraft was not out in cislunar space where it might in some way become a hazard for other space vehicles in the future. Astrobotic then went into a failure review activity to come up with ideas of what they need to implement in future missions. For example, their Griffin mission 1, which will take NASA's Viper rover to the surface of the moon. And they're currently looking at how the findings from their review board will feed into any changes or any additional preparations they want to do for their Griffin mission. And we at NASA, we're looking forward to having Astrobotic tell us what they believe their schedule will be for the Griffin mission coming up. Go to the next chart, please. The second attempt was from Intuitive Machines. Intuitive Machines launched their IM-1 mission in February of 2024. It flew out to the moon. They found out they did a lot of new technology demonstrations, I think, as part of their mission, how their vehicle worked, how they operated it. They found out very soon to landing that they did not have access to their laser altimeters. So they would not have altitude readings during descent, powered descent and landing, which of course you need. So they came up with a plan working with one of the NASA instruments to pipe altitude measurement data off of the NASA technology instrument called the Navigation Doppler Leader into their spacecraft so that they could use that altitude data for their lunar landing. It turned out in retrospect that they did not have all the software configured on the lander side to accept that data. So that LiDAR seemed to work extremely well, but the spacecraft didn't use it to land. Instead, the spacecraft used its backup methodology, which was starting with the state vector when they started their deorbit burn and looking at how their IMU was operating and comparing that to optical images of their landing site. As they were coming into landing, the vehicle calculated its altitude instead of using altitude measurements and did all its landing power descent based on that. They landed faster in vertical descent than was their target, and they had about 1 meter a second lateral velocity instead of close to 0. And when they landed, they damaged at least one of their landing gear legs, so that when they shut off their engine, their spacecraft tilted and came down at an angle to the surface. I think their angle was like, I think 20 degrees to pure horizontal. A lot of this was all reported in open media, either at the conclusion of the mission or while the mission was going on. We got, even with the spacecraft tilted over, they took some time to understand what was restricting their communications performance. Of course, in the beginning, they didn't realize their spacecraft was tilted, and that was a big part of it. But we did get data from several of the NASA instruments that were flown on board. The first data from any instruments of the surface of the moon from the United States since Apollo 17 in 1972. And they have done their lessons learned, reviewed, and looked at how they're going to do things a little differently. You know, for example, making sure the laser altimeters can be addressed and are functioning on their later missions. And they're planning right now for their IM-2 mission in the fourth quarter of this year. Go to the next chart, please. And we have a large number of instruments and missions getting ready to launch. You can see a photo here of the Viper flight rover is now more than 95% assembled and getting ready to go into testing. And Bethany Ehlman's Lunar Trailblazer mission is shown here on the vibration table. It's going through environmental tests. That Lunar Trailblazer will fly as a ride share on Intuitive Machines' IM-2 mission that'll fly again fourth quarter of this year, current estimate. I didn't show any photos, but many of the PRISM instrument suites have made great progress. Dave Blewett's Lunar Vertex has been delivered to Intuitive Machines for integration on the IM-3 Nova-C vehicle. Mark Panning's Farsight Seismic Suite has just finished, I believe, environmental testing. And Bob Grimm's Litmus investigation is finished up all its environmental testing, and it's going to be, I think it's going to be held in place at Bob's location until it's ready to go over to Draper along with FSS for that CLPS delivery. Go to the next chart, please. We've updated our lunar mission spiral to show the major missions coming up through 2027. Any ones that are in gray in the lower right on the surface have not been selected yet, so we can't show you who the vendors will be for those lunar landings, but you can see the updates here for Artemis 3 and Gateway, and through 2026. And you can see that there's a lot of activity as time is going on. The spiral is changing, and we are getting more and more missions to orbital space and to the surface being planned. Go to the next chart, please. And what I'll leave you with is a snapshot of going forward, what it looks like for CLPS deliveries on the lunar surface. We still show on that spiral chart and on this chart, Viper going down with Astrobotic Griffin at the end of 2024. We're going to leave it that way. Although, as I've mentioned in public forums earlier, coming out of Peregrine Mission 1, it was exceedingly unlikely that Griffin and Viper would be ready to go to the lunar surface at the end of 2024. And once we see from Astrobotic what their schedule and plan is for 2025, we will update the Viper planning target that's shown here. You can see on this chart that Intuitive Machines mission called Prime 1 to Shackleton Connecting Ridge is coming up in the fourth quarter of this year, and also all the way in the middle and the right that Firefly Aerospace's mission to Mare Crisium on Blue Coast Mission 1 is coming up the fourth quarter of 2024. So we're expecting to have two companies make attempted deliveries to the moon in the last quarter of calendar year 2024. And you also might notice in the bottom left near the South Pole, you see one called South Pole Provider TBD CP22. That's the next South Pole mission that is being decided right now, and it's going to host the Lunar Explorer Instrument for Space Biology Applications, or LEA, from Mark Settles at Ames. And then if you go to the top left, the one that we will be deciding the vendor for after that, going to Gruithuis Tomes, is the CP21 mission, which will host Kerry Donaldson Hanna's Lunar Vulcan Imaging and Spectroscopy Explorer. So that's my update, Ryan. I will take a look in the chat and see if I can answer questions before the summary at the end of the session.